Thank you all for being here. It's an awesome conference. I just learned today that there's a Laravel day as well, so that's awesome. I will definitely going there. So today I will be talking about Laravel Dusk. Who has never heard of Laravel Dusk before? So that's 2 hands. Who has never heard of Laravel before? Everybody knows Laravel. Okay, so that's great. So this is mostly focused on what Laravel Dusk can do for you and how it works. I assume that you have a little bit of PHP knowledge. You don't really need Laravel knowledge. It's just an API that you can use. It's just PHP, right? So if you know PHP, you will probably understand all the code that I'm going to show you. So a little bit about me. I'm Bouwmann. I'm a developer at Enrise. We're a self-steering company. Which means that we don't have a boss, basically. We have self-steering teams, and each team has its own budget, its own HR. They're all doing their own thing. And the teams together work as one company. But yeah, I don't have a boss that's saying to me that I have to be there on time or something. That's something we decide as a team together. So we have weekly meetings together as a team to decide how we are going to the next step as a team. And that also means that we can decide what kind of technique we're going to use and so on. So it's a really a big variety of work next to my programming tasks. So I'm doing a lot more, and which is really nice. You learn a lot from that. I'm also a top contributor at Laracast. Laracast is one of the biggest forums for Laravel, which is created by Jeffrey Way, which is creating awesome tutorials, and I'm helping there around. And also made a tool called Markdown Mail, which is generating themes for Laravel's Markdown mails. So I spend a lot of time on Laracast, and I love helping out people and learning from that as well. I learned most of my Laravel things from just helping others, just Googling it for them, basically, but also trying things out in my projects, in other projects, and so on. So just like in the keynote we saw, you can also contribute this way. Not only Stack Overflow, but there are framework-specific forums and so on to actually help the community. So today we'll go over these steps. What's Laravel Dusk? What is browser testing in general? When to apply it? Why would you use Laravel Dusk? The code examples. I will do a live demo, and then maybe some alternatives, some caveats, and so on. So let's talk Laravel Dusk. So first we need to answer what is Laravel Dusk anyway. Laravel Dusk is a browser testing framework. So this means we can run tests in an actual browser. So it will pop up the browser, open up the link, fill in the forms, press the real button, and then submit the form, and then actually test if it works. So we can simulate the behavior of a user in a browser. In this case, Laravel Dusk is integrated into the Laravel framework. So you have all the power of Laravel, the migrations, the seeding, you can all reuse that in your tests. And because it's Laravel, it also has that same readability in the code. So you have a really nice API that you can use to actually write these tests. So before we dive into Dusk itself, I want to tell you a little bit more about browser testing in general. So browser testing is running the test in a browser. And it's all about an acceptable user experience across different browsers. So you want to have that the user has the same experience in all browsers. And it's okay to have a little bit of a different experience. For example, if you have a 3D animation, it would be fine if that is just static text in Internet Explorer, for example. And in that you have in Chrome a 3D effect. That's fine. As long as the core functionality is still accessible in all browsers, no matter what screen size or device. So Dusk can help you test all these cases. So you can test based on screen size, test on different browsers. So my example will only be in Chrome, but you can test Firefox and other browsers as well. So we can split this up in 2 ways, browser testing. You can do it manually. So just clicking around in a browser. That's what we do mostly, right? We have product owners for that. The customer itself, they're clicking through your application and then testing things out, test if everything works correctly. Some people might even use Browser Stack, for example, as a tool to go through your application and test it out. But they're generally slow, and also you have to go through every browser yourself. So if you have to test 4 browsers, you have to take the time to test one browser, multiplied by 4. So that's the time it takes you to test it. If you automate it, you can test all 4 browsers at the same time. And also automating it gives a safe feeling, right? Because you know it's gonna succeed, and if something is wrong, if the tests fail, you know it failed in the browser, so you know that the user will have the same experience. Okay. So first up, the manual browser testing. So testing if the browser gives the proper result, well, you can just do that by hand. Testing if the browser gives the correct experience. So that's something that's really a human thing, right? Testing if you hover over something and if that shows the correct effect. That's more of a human thing than a thing that has to be done by a browser automated tool. And also other things like downloading a PDF. That's really hard to test with just a browser. And there's also another advantage over manual browser testing, because you can resize the screen yourself and then test things out right away. Automated is that a little bit harder, because you have to do that on different screens multiple times, which takes a lot of time to actually test those things. But on the other hand, it's automated, so we don't really have to look into it. And also, like things where you have elements that float over each other when you're resizing things or that kind of stuff, that's really hard to test for a browser, an automated tool browser, because you can't really see if elements are over each other or not. And as a human eye, you can see that much easier than someone else, than the automated browser. So the alternative is automating. The automated browser testing is really nice because you can run it locally. You can run it in your continuous integration suite as well. So, for example, run it in GitLab. And you can run multiple browsers at the same time. And so sometimes the setup can be really hard. Like with Selenium, you need to have a Java server running and that kind of stuff. But we can actually make that easier because Laravel Dusk is making that easier for you. There's no extra setup. Just run Chrome and that's it. Another disadvantage of automated browser testing, you have to keep your tests up to date. If you add a new feature, you have to update the test or maybe add a new test. If you're doing it manually, you might be skipping some tests that you're doing. So it also is, you can easily find bugs then, or miss bugs. But that's the same thing with automated browser testing. If you add a new feature and you don't add a test for it, you don't know if it's working correctly. So you need to keep your tests up to date. But that also counts for unit testing and acceptance testing and so on. So we will only focus on the automated browser testing for the rest of the talk. So next to Laravel Dusk, there are other tools. So we have Laravel Dusk, which is, it's a really young framework actually for testing, 2017. Then we have Selenium, which is there for ages already, but it's Java. And Selenium is also a really old version. So it's right now it's 3.x, but yeah, it's not being kept up to date, or at least less than the newer frameworks. But it also has a lot of features already, so it's already pretty good. Then we have Cypress. Cypress is a JavaScript framework, which is doing the same thing as Laravel Dusk, just testing your browser, except you write your tests in JavaScript. And Cypress is by far the better tool than all the other tools, because it has a dashboard. You can even run your tests step by step, so you can click back step by step because it's JavaScript. It's recording a screen of every test that you take. Cypress is really good, but it's JavaScript, so it's not integrated in your Laravel application. So you need to have an extra repository or an extra set of code that you need to test your application. So that's why Laravel Dusk is really powerful, because it integrates with your PHP. Then we have Phantom, which seems to be dead. I don't know, it's dead. And then we have paid services. So there are online services that you can pay that can help you write your test or perform your test, but they're doing it for you. So it's really powerful, but it costs a lot of money and it also takes a lot of time. They do update their services, but it also takes a lot of time to update it for them. So sometimes you have to wait for 2 or 3 weeks to have the newest version of Chrome to test. Well, locally you just download the newest Chrome and you're up and running. So when do we actually apply browser testing? So if you're making a single web page for just a blog or something, then browser testing doesn't make really sense, right? It's just showing some content, You can test that manually as well. So you don't really want to automate that. It's way too much time for that. But as a web developer, it's your responsibility to make sure that your project works on every device and for all users. So no matter what browser, no matter what pixel rate they have, it needs to work. So that's where this comes in. So things that we can test is browser extensions. For example, if you load in an extension, you can check if the website is still working correctly. Some browser extensions break your website actually. And if you get a bug from a customer saying this doesn't work, well, you don't know what kind of extensions they have installed. Yeah, you're not going to find the bug because you don't have the same extensions. So you can ask your customer, what extensions have you loaded? You can load it in your test, run the test, and then see what's going on. So that's really powerful. The same goes for add-ons in Firefox, for example. So what we can test are, for example, pop-ups. So this is a model with just a pop-up or a model. You're filling in some information, and it's using JavaScript to fill in this information. And then you press submit, and you get to see this. So this is something we can actually test with Laravel Dusk. If you would do this with unit testing or acceptance testing or feature testing, you would be able to test it, but only in separated tests. So you would probably create data and then submit this form as a whole thing, submit it, and then check if it's in the database. And this view would be something you can check if the correct HTML is being outlined, but you're not checking if you're going from this page to that page with just the JavaScript. So we can test complete front-end frameworks or front-end applications, single-page applications, using a browser, actual browser, which works the best. So in a non-browser testing world, we would check the post request instead of just the get request, the post request, and the get request again, and so on. So we're actually testing complete flows instead of just testing a single feature that is doing something. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's not wrong to test it that way, but this way we can't really test how the autofill works and that kind of stuff. So it's really important to test these things as well. In this case, it's a core feature that you can start typing an address, you can select the address, and then it will autofill it. So this is a really important feature for this application. So when we have heavy JavaScript stuff or a lot of animations, we can also test that. So it's really hard to test animations in general, but we can still see if pop-ups show up, if some elements pop up, and that kind of stuff. So we can't really see if some CSS is changing. That's really hard to see. But we can see if some classes are available or if an element is visible or not. So if this pop-up shows up, we can actually see if that element is visible or not. So we can test those things. So browser testing also takes a lot of time, right? To run the tests, to write the tests. So I would actually say only test your core features, your core components. And in most applications, that is authentication, sending emails. You can actually test sending emails, right? We can just log. Browser testing is just opening a browser and performing something. So if you're actually sending an email to Gmail, you can just open up Gmail, log into Gmail, and see that the email is there. It's just a browser, right? So you can test any website. You can also DDoS a website with that. Just saying. You can do a lot of things because it's just a browser. It's just running a browser. So it's not testing this on unit level. It's like the bigger features. You're testing a whole feature as a whole. For example, automated payment stuff. Like if you have a web shop, you're selling some item, and you want to test that. You want to make sure that the user is paying for it, and that it gets redirected back, and that they receive some email or something. You can't really test that with the current set of tools without browser testing, because you don't get to. You can only fake that they went to the payment provider and that they got sent back a success response. You can't really test that right now. But with browser testing, you can. You can just pay. You can do a fake payment, and then you can see that you're redirected back to the current website, and then see that you get a success message and stuff. So that's something you can actually test right now. So filling in forms, that kind of stuff is then possible. Also another thing is outflows. For example, you have a website where you can log in with your GitHub account or Facebook account. That's really hard to test. We're assuming that everything works at Facebook's end, and that you're getting redirected back if they press authorize. But what if they don't press authorize? What will happen then? How will your application handle? You can fake those responses from Facebook and test that. but you really want to test it in a real browser. How does that actually work? So you can press the Facebook button, you're redirected to Facebook, log in, authorized, and you're redirected back. And you can actually test that in the browser. Yeah, so I will come back on more examples later, but there's some things. So what actually tools can do, like Dusk can also make screenshots. So it can make a screenshot of your current page, and you can get to see that in the output. Right now, Dusk cannot make videos, but other tools like Selenium and Cypress, for example, they record videos of the whole process as well. So you can actually watch it back and see how the user has experienced the application. With Dusk, we only have screenshots. So there's two ways to make a screenshot. Make your test fail. It will make a screenshot on the last failed action. Or just making a screenshot that's an action as well in your browser. And then again, automated process on website. There's this guy who, I will do this example later maybe but as well, but there's this guy who had to fill in a payment every month. And he was tired of doing it every month to renew his subscription. So he automated it with Dusk. It's really easy. It was just logging in, clicking on subscribe, and that's it. So you can automate things as well with this. So here's another example where you can do some things that you can test with this. So in Dusk, you won't see the mouse move, but you can actually see the inputs being filled. So in this case, it's just a simple example. I will do a live example in a few minutes. So yeah, it's really powerful to test these kind of forms, but also forms that are heavily filled with JavaScript. You can just test that. So that was browser testing in a nutshell. Let's go to Laravel Dusk. So Laravel Dusk is integrated within Laravel, and therefore it's really powerful with a Laravel application. You don't have to use it with a Laravel application. You can only install it in a Laravel application, but you can create a Laravel application, install Dusk, and then run it on some other website as well. So what we do, we have some other projects that are built in Symfony, and then we have a separated project running Laravel and Laravel Dusk, which is testing that application for the browser testing. So that makes it really powerful. Except we don't really have the data from that other application because there are two separate applications, so you have to know what kind of data is already in that application. If you have a Laravel application, you can reuse that, but I will show you an example later. So Laravel Dusk is built on the web driver from Facebook. So this is the web driver that is running Chromium in most cases, which is actually doing some things with Selenium, but they all abstracted that for us. So we just run a Chrome binium, and they do the rest for us. So Laravel wants to make this as easy as possible. So there's an expressive syntax for building these tests and writing your code. And the same goes for running these tests. So the standalone ChromeDriver from Facebook makes it possible to actually perform these tests really easily. So how did Laravel Dusk come to the world? We first had, in Laravel 5.2, we had the Symfony browser kit. And the Symfony browser kit is already really powerful, but it's only generating HTML, so it's not doing any JavaScript. So you can write your test against this, and it will just work fine, except you can't really test if there's any JavaScript. So if you have a single page application, you can test with the browser kit, because it's only returning the HTML. So we can actually perform tasks on that, like pressing a button, filling a field, but it's only applying that on the HTML and then doing some action with that. So then Laravel Dusk came out of nowhere, which is really nice. And it made it possible to test your features in a browser, even with JavaScript. Great. How do you install Laravel Dusk? Well, it's just as easy. Compose require Laravel/Dusk, and that's it. So this only works in a Laravel project, like I said, so that's one important thing to know. But that's it. So whenever you do that, you get all these commands available. So we have the Dusk command to actually run the task. And then we have a few other things here to perform some actions. The ChromeDriver is to install the actual ChromeDriver. But if you run Dusk install, it will do that for you as well. And then we have some helper methods here to create components, to create pages, or a test at all. So that makes it really powerful to create new tests. So whenever we run PHP Artisan Dusk install, we get this output. So it's scaffolding all the items we need. So it's creating a new browser directory in our test directory. And it will download the binaries for us as well. So this is the output from if you run phpday Chrome ChromeDriver. So it will create the ChromeDrivers in the vendor directory. So you don't have to push them to the production environment. And you also don't want to run Dusk in your production environment at all, because it's a ChromeDriver which is running your actual application. So it has access to your whole application. So you never want to run this in production. So if you install this, it's always being installed in your dev directory, or you can install it normally, but then Laravel will only add the service provider on the local environment. So there's always security for that in place. Anyway, we have these 3 drivers. So there's one for Linux, Mac, and Windows. So on all platforms you can test this out. I'm just only doing it on Mac because it's a MacBook. So after that we get a new directory. So we get a browser directory. We have components. So there's no components by default. We get a console directory. So Laravel Dusk will help you with this as well. So whenever your test fails or something happens in your JavaScript, so something is being outputted by the browser to the console, it will be put in here as well. So if you, for example, have an error in your JavaScript, or you have a warning in your JavaScript, you will see that here after you have run your test. So that's really nice. You can see that as well. Then we have pages, so we can have reusable parts in Dusk. So I will do examples later. And we have screenshots. So like I said, if you test fail, you get a screenshot, or you make them yourselves. And there's an example test by default. Yeah, that's it. So this is a basic example test that we can do with Laravel Dusk. So we can go to Google, type in Q. In this case, we fake the browser. So we fake that we're typing something on our keyboard. So we're saying, whenever you have your mouse on this, the focus on this input, press enter. So then it will perform that action for us. So in Google, when you type something, you press enter. There's no submit button, right? That's not Google. So you have to press enter. And then we can see that the input still has this value. And we can see that it asserts some string, and that the link is there as well. So if you Google for phpday, you get this output at the top. So you can try that. You get this back. So now that we know how to run a single test, right, a simple test, we can add more tests. So this is already showing the power of Laravel, because right now we can actually create here a new user and use that in our test. If you're testing it on a different application or a different URL, you can't do this because this data is not going to be submitted to that application. So whenever you run a server or you run it against an existing application, you need to make sure that the data is seeded already before you run your test. But in this case, we have this power to actually create only the data we need for this test. That makes the test also faster because there's no extra load of data that's already being loaded. There's not a database with 100 users. There's just a database with 1 user that we're actually using to test. So this is just the basic factory. It's creating a user in a database. And then for our login function, we say visit the login page, assert see that there is a string login, type something again, press the login button, and we can see that we're on the welcome page that we have logged in. So this is a basic Laravel test for logging in. Yeah, that's it. So Laravel has this concept of pages. So just let me go back to this one. I'm testing here, it says here Vault.com. I've created an application for this talk that's called Vault, which is a credentials application. So it's a password application. So you can put in your own username and password in there, and then you have your own password manager, which you can use, which is built in VueJS as a single page application with a Laravel backend as API. So it's all JavaScript what it's doing. So this is all being generated by JavaScript and then being performed by Laravel Dusk. But I will do the demo later on with the application. But if you're seeing some weird things about application-specific things, that's the application. So Laravel has this concept of pages. So pages are reusable elements that you can use on multiple pages. And you can add functions to it. So you can say a certain URL has a login string. And then we can add a method to here, which we can reuse. So we can say, instead of saying here visit the hard-coded URL, we can say visit new my page. And then from there we can perform these actions that we define here. And we can also add assertions here to the page as well. So we can say each page always needs to have this div, for example, some assertions. I will show that in a different example. So we log in as a user. So this is basically the same thing as we did here, right? The same actions here, but we put it now in a page. I put a pause here because it's an API, so we have to wait for the callback to get returned. So that's why it's waiting for a second before continuing to the next page, because it has to do all these API calls. So if we then go to a login test, we can reuse this page. So we can say here, new login page, logging as a user, and then we can pass in the user, and then we can say we're on the credentials page, right? It's a credentials application, so we're on a certain page. So this is being reused in our test now, which is really powerful because every time we want to log in, we just say new login as user. Well, login might be a bad example because there you don't want to log in every time you want to start a test. So there's a helper method within Dusk to actually log in a user. But for the example, this is a really great example for that. So let's do a more expressive example. So we have this login thing again, and then we can create a new credential. So in this case, it's all doing JavaScript on the front end, and then we're performing against that JavaScript. So in this case, we're waiting until the credentials loader is gone. So in this case, whenever you go to the page, it starts doing an API request to the backend and loading all the credentials. But for that, I put up a little spinner. So it's waiting until that element is missing. So it's going to wait until that element is gone, and then it's going to go into the next step. So it has to perform each step before it continues. So then it says assert 6 credentials. I have this method here, create default credentials. It will just create 6 credentials with a factory, just so we have some data. Well, then we press credential. It's the credential button to create a new credential. We can see that the model is showing up. And we're just going to wait here for 1 second to see this being popped up. So you could have done wait for element, but in this case, wait for this element for 1 second. If it doesn't show up, test fails because the model should pop up right away. Then we type in some credentials. We press save. We wait until the model is gone, and then we can see that there are 7 credentials now because there was 1 credential added. So this is all basically writing a browser test, and so these are the kind of tests that you will be writing when you're using Laravel Dusk. So it might seem a little bit magic. Some methods really look tough to figure out, but it's all in the documentation. So and you get a lot of possibilities to test these things. So for forms, we have a lot of options. You can just type. We already saw that one. I made a typo. This should be select, right? So for the select field, we have size, and then we can put in a value, and then it will select that one for you. So we have check and uncheck, radio buttons, attach files, and we can even clear inputs, that kind of stuff. So you can be really powerful about testing your forms. So you can press keys. So you can do shortcodes or shortcuts that you want to use in your application. So for example, I want to type something. I can say shift PHP and then day, so it will output phpday. So these kind of things you can actually test in your browser. Mouse overs, dragging stuff around. So if you have a heavily application with where you can have an agenda, for example, where you can drag elements from one to left, well, you can do that as well, testing that as well. We have pause methods, wait methods. Well, I already showed you this until missing. There's also wait for reload. So, and you can even wait until, and then you can perform some JavaScript as well. So it's really flexible in this case for what you want to wait for or what you want to perform. So you can also interact with the browser itself. So we all know this annoying pop-up from the browser. Well, you can wait for that. You can perform actions on that. You can press the OK button or the cancel button. We can even resize the browser. So if you want to perform some full screen test or an iPhone 7, I believe this was. So you can actually test different screen sizes and see how your application behaves in those browsers. And then we have more assertions. So we have assert title. So this is basically checking if the HTML is generating the correct title. We have assert C just to see if there's an actual string on the page. Assert C in, so we can check if some text is in an element. But these are all basic tests that you also would have with an acceptance testing framework or with a functional testing framework. This is what the Symfony browser kit framework already had. These are added here as well, but they're just checking it on the browser level instead of only HTML level. And then you have these assert visibility, present, missing, and so on. So there's a lot of things to use here. So this is a full list of all the assertions that are available. It's a huge list. So if you need to perform something, just look up in the documentation. There's probably something that works for you. And then finally, we have components. So components are like pages, but they're smaller. So a page is something with an URL, and a component is something that you can reuse, and you can perform actions on it, just like a page. But they are more element-based. So for example, a date picker, that's something you might want to reuse in your application multiple times. But you can also reuse that multiple times on a certain page. So in this case, I added method select date, and you can pass in a month and a day, and then it will perform those actions for us. So this is basically testing if your date picker is performing correctly. And then we have this assert method. So if this assert method fails, you won't be able to call this method. So whenever you new up one of these components, it will always perform this assert method and checking if the element is available on the page in this case. And so this assert method is also available on pages as well, so you can reuse that. So if we put that in a test, you get something like this. We can say we visit the home page, and within the new date picker, we select the date, and then we can see that the date has been added to the page as a string. So this way you can reuse these components in your application. I haven't really felt the need for these components, but yeah, if you want to use them, I always like to be explicit in my tests about what I'm doing, and I think a component is really like abstracting that thing. So, but it's all up to you to use it or not. It's all available. So what are the benefits of Laravel Dusk? Because we get to use a lot of browser testing, but we have Selenium. Some people maybe have that running. So why would you switch to Laravel Dusk, or why would you not use Cypress as an example? Because it's Laravel, it's really easy to integrate it in your application. And it also means that you have authentication, sessions, caching. You can all access that during your tests. So that makes it really powerful. You can't do that in other frameworks because they're not connected to your application. It also comes with the default Laravel tools. So if you, for example, use Homestead or Laravel Valet, Homestead is the vacant box from Laravel. So if you use those tools, this works out of the box. If you just run composer require Laravel Dusk, you can just run it and it works out of the box. It already has that ChromeDriver for you working. And also Laravel Dusk, which is really an internal thing of Laravel Dusk, but you can also switch it to use other drivers. So you can switch Selenium for Phantom, for example. So if you already have something, a server up and running for that, you can switch to another working thing that's on the background of the web driver from Facebook. But that's all configuration. So by default, it's just using the Selenium driver with the Chrome browser. So the disadvantages of Laravel Dusk. Well, it's coupled to Laravel, so you have to use Laravel to actually run this. So you always need the Laravel application to make this work. And there's currently no dashboard or something. So when you run it, you just get your PHP unit output, but that's it. So there's a screenshot and there's some JavaScript maybe output, but that's it. Other tools like Selenium or Cypress, they have dashboard tools or more reporting tools on your tests. So they have more information about why your test failed and that kind of stuff. In this case, we only have the PHP unit output, so that makes it a little bit harder to debug sometimes. But in the end, it's from 2017. It's only 2 years old, so there's a lot more to work on this and to improve it, to make it better. There is someone who tried to make a dashboard of it, but it only works when you run it locally, so it doesn't work with your Homestead vacant box and that kind of stuff. So there are some limitations on that. So there is work on it, but it's not ready enough for everyone. And then finally, it's not hard to run Laravel Dusk because you can run it locally. But yeah, most people automate their things like your code style, your PHP unit tests, but you also want to automate this, of course. You don't want to run that by hand all the time. So you only need two things. You need a running application. So with Laravel, we can run PHP arts and serve, and it will start up the application. And then we just have to fire off a ChromeDriver. So this binary is already in the vendor directory, right? Because we have to run Dusk. We only have to install the ChromeDriver using the command, and then we have the ChromeDriver. So we can just run it, and that's it. And in this case, we can, for example, use PHP arts and serve to pull up the application, but you can use whatever you want. If you want to use a container or something, you can also do this. And then you get something like this. We have a working Laravel Dusk. So I will go over this in the demo on how this works. If you want to know more about how to set up these pipelines and stuff for Laravel Dusk, just come to me after the talk. I don't think we have time for that. And it's more like Docker specific instead of just Laravel Dusk. So I will focus on Laravel Dusk. So demo time. Can everybody see the screen? Correct. Yeah, okay. I will just mirror my screen. And then, is this already readable, or should I make it bigger? It's readable, okay. So Laravel comes by default with the Dusk test case. So if we go to the test directory and then the browser directory, we have this in here, the Dusk test case. So this is the default test case that you extend when you write a new test. So if we go down, we have a setup method. We start the ChromeDriver, so it's actually starting the driver for us. And in this case, I have some extra methods. But it's all about this method, so the protected function driver, which is creating the actual driver. And as you can see here, it's using Chromium, the Chrome options in here to run it. So it's always running on this port. So as you can see, it also says Selenium server URL. It's running Selenium on the back, but we don't see it because Facebook has abstract that for us. So we don't really care what's happening there. And so this is one important line, the headless version. So there's two options of running Laravel Dusk. Headless mode, which means that you see the browser, and not headless mode, which is you're seeing the browser, so you can actually see what's happening with the test. So headless is something you always run inside your container or inside your Vegas. Because those things don't have, they don't have, you can take a run. So if you then in headless mode, it will fail because it can't open up the Chrome browser. So it's really important to know that it will fail your test. So in this case, we run it headless mode. So if I run the test here, I have a make command, make Dusk. So in this case, I'm migrating the database, seeding the database, and it then starts running the application. So it's now starting the test. First test is always a little bit slow. Application the first time, maybe some caching, and so on. So this is creating the application and performing all these tests. So this takes around a minute for me, for around 12 tests, I guess, 10 or 12 tests. It takes around a minute. So you see that these tests are really slow, but in the end, they're testing a whole browser. So they have to boot up the whole browser. For every test, it's a new browser. So it takes a lot of time to boot up the browser and perform some task. Yeah, so the example I showed you before, the Googling phpday, this one was really slow because the internet is really slow here. Going to perform that task really slow right now. Normally it only takes like 4 or 5 seconds, but now 25 seconds because it's waiting for that page to load. So in this case, the test will take a little bit more than 1 minute. So whenever it's done, I will go over the application a little bit and then show you how these tests are working. And yeah, this will take a little bit more time. Okay, we'll just wait for that and then we'll go here. So the Google test again, is just doing this and then performing that on the browser. So if you, for example, do a more advanced test, so the search test in this case, you can search in the application. So you log in and then you go to the credentials page and then we wait until the credentials are loaded and then we can search in the type field and it will perform something automatically. So whenever you type something, Vue will automatically start searching it on the background. So if we open up the application, this is the default application. You can see here that there's a login page and that kind of stuff. So if I open up the login test, you can see here it creates a user with a password. And then it will perform these tasks for us. So typing in these credentials and so on, and then it will see that you're on the page. So in this case, we don't have an account, so we register one. phpday. Let's do password as well. Password. Oh, I think I made a typo. Okay, let's go. Okay, well, I will do it the different way. I'll show you how Laravel Dusk is running it, but then in the real browser, so you can actually see what's going on. So if I go to my test case, so when I want to run it locally in the browser, I just have to turn on headless mode, and that's it. So if I then run my test again, so it will clear out the database, and then we'll start performing the test. As you can see, it's popping up a browser for me and then performing some tasks. So this is the actual application, and it's going really fast, right? So there's one test where it needs to wait 20. So you will see that it's going really, really fast right now. But as you can see, the first time it's opening up the browser, it takes a little longer to actually open up the browser. So this is the Google test, where it's going to Google, internet slow, so it takes a lot more time. So it might even fail because it takes too long. And we'll see how it goes. But as you can see, it's just starting a browser, and also says that it's being automated, right? It says here, it's an automated test software. See, the test failed because it took too long. Well, it's just logging in. So this is the search method. Well, yeah, it's going pretty fast. So these are really cool things to actually test out and see that your application being processed through the test. So in this case, whenever you click on the password, it's all stars. When you click on the password, it will retrieve the password and show it to you in the browser, and it will disappear after 20 seconds or after 10 seconds. So it was testing that as well. So yeah, there's one test has failed right now, right? Because it took too long. So if we're going to here again, and then to the screenshots, we should see a screenshot here that it can reach the page. So yeah, it makes sense, right? Because we don't have internet, it's way too long so to test. And if we then go to the output here, the console, then we have one warning here. I used read alert, and I probably made a mistake somewhere. See, I used show loader on confirm and set it true, but pre-confirm not defined. So I probably should define pre-confirm. So these are all things that will help you build your application or make your application better because you get all this output. Let's see. So let's do one test. So login test. So we can actually do a screenshot here. Screenshot and then call this email. So you always have to name a screenshot. Let's do password. And then loading. So and let's put in a wait here so we can actually see what's going on. Let's do for 2 seconds. So it's already passing here. So if we just run this test, so this is the login test, so we can run. So after migrate fresh seed, just gonna see the database, PHP Artisan Dusk, then the test to run. So tests, browser, login test, PHP. So it's just this test now. So we did that, and I see it's to test your application and actually see how things behave. So this is a really important feature. So if I'm going back here, so I was talking about GitLab run this application, how you can run this in your GitLab CI. So this is doing the exact same thing. Can we zoom this out? So we make this more readable. So whenever you run your application here, so it's starting PHP Artisan here, and then we're starting the ChromeDriver, and then we just run PHP Artisan Dusk, so it will run all the tests for us. And then as you can see here, it's going create a new credential, delete a credential, log in with user, and so on. So it's creating things for us. So one important thing about these tests is that you perform something, it will actually update the database that you're running. So you can't run SQLite, for example, on your test, because if you run SQLite in memory, it will be gone before the browser has been started, so there's no data anymore. It's already gone. On every request, your data is gone. So, you can't use that. So you have to use a stable database that you use in your test. So that's why I also added here use database migrations. So Laravel has multiple options in this. You have database migration, which runs your migrations on every application refresh. So every time you open a new test, it will do the whole migration and then perform the test. You have a refresh database, which is a trait you can include. And if you use that one, then migrate again, so it will just remove the data that you've added using database transactions, but you can't really use that within browser, within Dusk, because it doesn't know that. You can't really run the transaction because you're on a new page, new request, so it doesn't know about the transaction anymore. So in this case, you always have to run your migrations on every single page. So that's why I'm creating data on every test in this case. If you don't do this, and I would run this test twice and would remove this, then the test would fail because it doesn't move the data anymore from the database, and it will then perform again, and it will fail the test because so it's then trying to create a new user with the same email address, and then the constraint fails. So that's really important that you refresh your database, or make sure that your database doesn't hide information between the tests. So that's one important thing to notice. Yeah, so we just made screenshots, right? So we can see these screenshots here as well. So that's really powerful, really nice to have here. Yeah, I think that's it for the demo. Are there any questions? Anything you want to see, or anything you're curious about? Yep.
You mentioned one of the points, instead of making a screenshot, you could make videos.
Yeah, so Laravel Dusk can't make videos right now, but other frameworks can. So there are other frameworks that are capable of making videos of your test suite. For example, Selenium and Cypress, for example. Cypress is really good in it, but yeah, it's a feature that Dusk is still missing.
Okay.
Yep, definitely. So yeah, we have 3 minutes left, so I will just do the GitLab CI thing real quick. If I'm going to the project, let me just open it up here, GitLab CI. So we just have 2 stages here, one for the code style and one for Laravel Dusk. In this case, we're installing Chromium in here. So it will always grab the latest Chromium for us. You can also use the binary that's included within Laravel Dusk. But I decided to, as a demo, just install it yourself in an Alpine application. And so this is the most important one, right? We're actually running the server and running Chromium and then Dusk. But we still need to generate a key, we need to migrate the database, and we need to run npm install because it's a front-end application. And then we added the artifacts. So this is one important thing. Whenever your test fails, it generates a screenshot. But when you run your pipeline, it will be lost in forever. So if you want to keep the data, you have to create an artifact, and then it will be stored here. So if I'm going back here and then to the pipelines, so this will take a minute. Can we see it here? No, I can see it here. So this specific task. Oh, come on. Slow into that. Okay, we'll just go to this one. I guess it's faster. Yeah. So it will be showing those artifacts on the side here. In this case, we didn't have a failing test, but we can still browse the artifacts here. We have that JavaScript file that's here. So everything what we have stored here, I think it's tests, browser, go. And then the console one. So this is where this JavaScript thing is still being returned. So we can actually see what went wrong, and we can look back into it to actually reuse that to make our test better or to make our application better. So the credentials are here. So this is really important to have these things in your CI. So thank you all for being here and listening.